All right, Wiz, today we talk about teaching LLMs how to use computers. But are they going to be using your computer today?
They're certainly going to be using a computer, Greg. That's for sure.
Okay. Is this like a capability that we should be comfortable with letting loose onto our computers in general?
Absolutely no 0% chance. Please don't do that. Yeah.
All right, all
No
right, all right.
shot.
Let's just level set here today. Okay, so it's definitely dope, though, right? That it can use computers. Definitely dope.
Super dope.
Just maybe we should use a little bit of caution as the developers, the ones with the early access to this kind of capability. It is our responsibility to make sure that we're leveraging AI in like a good way, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of onus on us, the developer, to make sure that these systems that we're creating with something like computer use are safe. There's a lot of work to be done to make sure that you're running this in a safe environment. You're going to see that Anthropic is giving us the access, right? Letting us play with this, but they're not shipping like a product that says plug in your computer, and then let her rip.
Not yet.
So not yet, yeah.
Not yet. But so goes the way of the world. We'll see what happens in time. At least for today, we're going to break down what Anthropic has done, what they've said from their blogs to what their CEO is saying publicly now. And you're going to give us a run through of the LLM using a computer, not your computer, right?
That's correct, Greg.
Let's go. All right. Well, we'll see you back for discuss throughout and then demo. Thanks, Wiz. Welcome, everybody. I'm Dr. Greg, and that's the Wiz, aka the LLM Wizard, Chris Alexiak. We are AI Makerspace, and today we're covering a really cool new tool. This is maybe the coolest one that has come out in quite some time, and it's that LLMs can now actually use your computer. So the multimodality is coming into play here, as well as the agentic behavior. We're going to walk through kind of each of those things. There's a lot of stuff being said about computer use. We're going to break it down. We're going to tell you guys what to expect. And we'd like to have a little bit of kind of a cool discussion throughout, because it is kind of a big, almost turning point here that we're able to do this kind of thing. So setting this out into the world, you guys that are joining us today are definitely very early adopters. So definitely worth getting your hands on something like this. And, again, if you have questions along the way, whether they relate to technical or safety and ethical concerns, please do shout them out in the Slido link, and we'll do our best to get to each and every question along the way. All right. With that, let's go ahead and jump into teaching LLMs to use computers, the latest from Anthropic, but certainly rooted in much of the work we've been seeing from the industry over the past year. What we want to get out of today, of course, we want to see the LLM go burr and use the computer. It's going to be pretty dope. But we want to understand what exactly is going on behind the scenes of computer use. And spoiler alert, it's not that complicated, especially if you're familiar with the underlying patterns that we often talk about on this channel. We also want to take a look at how we're assessing computer use. And there's a new emerging benchmark that is kind of the best one out there. We expect this benchmark space to grow quite significantly as we do more and more complex things with agents. And then, of course, we'll watch Wiz run computer use on a computer, and it'll be one that we could recommend that you guys use as well, one that keeps your data, stuff on your machine safe and sound, and away from any malicious behavior that an AI might accidentally go forth and do. All right, so we'll break down computer use in a number of different dimensions. We're going to talk about what we know from the blog. We're going to talk about what we've heard this week from the CEO. We're going to talk about generally how this thing works. And then we're going to talk about how we assess it with this OS World benchmark before we see it in action today. Again, discussion along the way. Computer use was released October 22nd. And what we know from the announcement is a couple of things. They said, quote, "We are trying something fundamentally new." They said, instead of making specific tools to help Claude complete individual tasks, we're going from specific now to more general computer skills, general AI, right? And there were a couple of examples they released on their YouTube channel as well. And the way we interact with the computer use functionality is not different than the way we interact with Claude generally. That is, we provide a prompt. So there was a coding example that was pretty cool where it was like, yo, make me a sweet 90s vibe web page. And then kind of computer use went and fixed an error associated with the web page that was generated. This is slightly more in real life example. Hey, I got my friend coming. We want to watch the sunrise. Find us a spot, check the drive time, check the sunrise time, set up a calendar event. This worked out pretty well, and it kind of looks pretty cool on the screen to do. Again, this kind of thing is one that in order to get access to your calendar on your computer, you're going to have to run it straight on your computer. Not recommended. Computer use basically was released in this public beta. They said, all right, developers, let's go try this out. You guys try it first. We don't want to release it to the public because, I mean, who knows what the public might do with it. At least we're putting the barrier up that you have to engage with the API. And that's similar to releases we've seen in the past in the field. What computer use does is it does a couple of things. It looks at the screen. It finds things on the screen. It moves the mouse, the cursor, right? It can click buttons and it can type. So it can do kind of a lot of stuff. And interestingly, according to the CEO, it actually didn't take all that much to do this computer use thing. What does that mean exactly? And where's he coming from? Well, hopefully we can get to the bottom of it by the end of today. I want to take a quick aside, and I want to talk about agents. Because agents are at the core of what's going on here. When we talk about an agent, we're talking about a system that can leverage reasoning to make dynamic decisions in an application flow. When we talk about agents and giving them access to tools, we can talk about trying to use agents to solve problems. Rather than a simple LLM call, we're often operating in loops, in agentic cycles, where we might have a prompt come in, or maybe this is an initial state. The LLM is going to reason, okay, which tool should I pick up? What am I going to observe by going to that tool and taking some action and collecting some data? And then do I have enough to provide an output to say the task is done? It's kind of like having a superhero decide which tool to use. And as we'll see today, these tool belts are maybe becoming more like toolboxes. And you can imagine the toolbox is part of eventually, a big van or a giant truck full of tools. And we're driving along to do whatever we might need to do in a general contractor capacity. And so we're starting to build out these toolkits. We're starting to build out these tool belts. And it's not different in the fundamentals conceptually than the more simple applications that we've looked at many times at AI Makerspace. We have some prompt. We go to the agent. The agent is going to decide which action to take. That action is going to then be considered before the agent decides, okay, I'm done, or here's the final answer in the case of a question. So if we want to take a look at what kind of actions are being taken, here it's really simple. We already talked about them, right? There's four. We can take screenshots, we can move the cursor, we can click buttons, and we can type text. These are kind of the things in our toolbox that we can consider as being the core of what computer use is bringing. And these obviously kind of can flow down to a lot of other things. I mean, if you can move the cursor and click and type text, then you can obviously do a Google search and so on and so on. It's a little more flexible than just hitting the Google search API as a tool, for instance. And each time we do something, we're going to then pay attention to what we observe from the screenshot, the button click, the cursor move. And we're going to see if there's something new that we should consider, something new that we should observe, something new that we should feed back into the prompt and into the thread of conversation so that we can be a little bit more informed before we either answer the question or say we've completed the task. Remember, agents are a pattern of behavior. They're a pattern of reasoning and of action. And when we talk about reasoning, we talk about kind of making these inductions. We're sort of trying to look at what's the plan, how am I updating the plan based on what I'm observing, actions I'm taking, and then actually taking the actions is really about allowing us to interface with additional information. Now, computer use obviously is literally through the user interface, through the GUI. We're interfacing it with it just like a human would, more or less. And it's really interesting as we get into computer use that instead of just trying to gather additional information from external sources, we might want to include additional information from this environment, this computer environment, not Wiz's computer, but a computer environment that we'll see used today. And an important thing to note as we sort of consider what is exactly going on behind the scenes of computer use is if we zoom in and we look at like what's happening when we actually call the tools in the toolbox, what we're actually doing is we're sort of combining two steps. We're sort of combining the reasoning step with the action step. And we're doing this, we're combining these two things through function calling, through tool calling. That is to say that function calling is simply reasoning and action in a single step. And that's all we're doing here with computer use. It's just the tools are different. And when we give the LLM access to the right tools for the right job, we can do well. Wrong tools for the job, maybe not so much. And so that this tool access is simply function calling. We can kind of think of it like this. Computer use is controlling Claude, who has access to an agent toolbox that's just function calling kind of all the way down. And at the bottom of function calling, we can see the reasoning action pattern. And there we are. The toolbox, of course, contains the core things here. Look at the screen, move the cursor, click the buttons, type the text. Basically use the computer, just like we've been doing since the graphical user interface for the computer was invented. Not all that long ago. I want to bring Wiz up to the stage here to have a quick discussion, though. I mean, one of the things that is a little bit confusing maybe to folks is we're doing all this with a single agent. Is that right, Wiz?
I mean, it's a single loop that's driving this forward. So it's we don't have multiple loops that are happening. We have a single loop that's driving this interaction, at least in the implementation we're looking at today. Whether or not it is, a single agent or multiple agents depends on how you implement the feature, right? So you could think about implementing it in a multi-agent setup, but there's no strict requirement that you need to do so. And in fact, the example we look at today is uh, only tenuously an agent because it can loop, right? So
I mean, how might we sort of think about extending this to multi-agent setups? Like, is this where we might see real production grade multi-agent systems, is with something like computer use, or maybe not so much?
I mean, computer use still depends on the core design principles that we consider when building agentic systems. So they're kind of working in parallel, as you earlier described, right? Each of these actions is a tool, and so the better we get at tool using, the better we get at creating agents that use tools. Those improvements should be felt when we're talking about computer use. Absolutely.
Okay. So, I'm just kind of imagining, like, when we get a sort of a computer use case that works really well, we could imagine maybe, like, could the other agent, like, be another computer? Like, it's like we got computer over here environment, computer over here environment. Now we sort of have, like, the agents operating the individual environments and going back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, why not, right? Like just like if you're building out a team of workers, each one has their own computer and they do stuff on it. We can imagine this being applied to all kinds of fun, multi-environment situations, or even multiple actors handling different components of the interaction with the computer, or handling specific tools. There's all like a bash agent versus a click and shoot agent, right? So I think this is a all the possibility space exists because all we're doing is equipping our model with the ability to interface with the computer as we interface with the computer.
That's right. So in the future, then, we could hire a coder, never buy him a computer, never see him in person, because they don't actually exist and neither does their computer.
Yeah, their computer, it exists
It
in some
exists.
virtual environment,
Yeah.
but there's no laptop you can go to. Exactly.
That's right. That's because there's no lap to put it on, right?
That's
Yeah,
right.
classic. All right. Thanks for clarifying that. We'll keep the discussion rolling in just a little bit, please. Okay, so the other thing that was cool this week is that we heard from the CEO, and because he was on the Lex Friedman podcast, I was really curious what Dario was going to say about computer use. And it's really interesting to sort of understand how this sort of popped out. Almost, it wasn't this sort of really forethought thing. It was sort of like it stacked up over time, that this capability became all of a sudden within reach. Like, they were able to play with this, get some demos that could, like, fill out spreadsheets, interact with a website, open all kinds of different programs, do it on across operating systems. And he said, in theory, there's nothing that you can do with this computer use thing that you really couldn't have done before, because the reality is the multimodal models have kind of led the way here. The purpose of packaging it up in this API is to really lower the barrier to entry versus having to create this huge custom software using multimodal models in different ways. Now, he also said that, we're careful to warn people, right? Like, don't just leave this thing running and just kind of walk away, right? It's kind of like the self-driving car thing a little bit. Like, we're just getting started here, right? Like, we're just doing our first little test run. Probably don't want to get out of the car yet. And so we want to make sure that as developers, as early adopters that are aiming to do good in the world, that we put the right kinds of boundaries and guardrails on this stuff. And he went on to say that, you know, one of the key reasons that they released first the API was because, you know, if you just handed this over to people, they would probably just let it run their computer. You know, you could think of a lot of bad things. Delete all files permanently, for instance. You know, these type of things we don't necessarily want to go straight into. It's more like us as developers, let's play with it. Let's find the limits. Let's create new benchmarks. Let's create new guardrails. Let's create new ways to constrain this as these things get more and more powerful, because as they get more and more powerful, it's going to be more and more important that we understand how to use these things safely. The good news is that right now, they're not as good as humans, like not even close to using computers. But it's maybe likely to change in not that long. So the question for all of you as developers and us at AI Makerspace is, how can we build things that are useful, that we're not abusing the capabilities here? And the question for Anthropic and their developers, and OpenAI and their developers, and Gemini and their developers, and everybody building these LLMs is, and when we release this kind of capability, how can we make sure people aren't going to abuse it too bad? Now, this is reminiscent of 5 years ago. If you guys remember, if you were back in the game in 2019, GPT-2 came out in February. And they told us, OpenAI told us, man, this is really good. We don't even really need supervised fine-tuning explicitly anymore. We can actually get great results without that explicit supervision. We can get great results simply by prompting. And then they thought about it and they were like, well, you know, how do we train this thing? Well, we trained it on like a ton of internet data, not the cleanest internet data, Common Crawl and web text, the data set. It contained like a ton of Reddit information. And, you know, when they first started playing with this, it kind of went a little off the handle sometimes. And they said, you know, we're concerned. And so, like, we're not gonna release the model. 2019. They said, rather, what we'll do is, as an experiment in responsible disclosure. What a great line. We are instead releasing a much smaller model for researchers to experiment, as well as a technical paper. A smaller thing for researchers to experiment with. Wiz, I wonder if, does that feel similar to what we're seeing here right now with computer use to you? It does to me.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we want to get to this point where we can just like let this thing rip, right? So I think the idea would be we're moving towards this world, you know, that we see on the slide. But we're not there yet, right? And it's going to be very difficult to get there safely. I think you said something earlier today that I just want to make sure you know we repeat, which is it's like when ChatGPT first came out, and like it was insane, what you could get the model to say and do, right? Like
Yeah.
it was out of this world, right? Because there's no guardrails at all.
So hilarious.
It was,
Yeah.
and to look back at that time now, it's like almost appalling that we did that, right?
That's
And
right.
they just didn't know how good these systems were, right? And how people could get them to do things that were so emergent. And so I think it's the same thing here when we let tools access our resources, our computer, potentially even act as us, right? One of the things you'll see is if you try to get this to act as you using personal information, it's going to try to decline, right?
No.
We just
Nice.
enter into it's a new safety space, right?
That's
And
right.
so I think yes, building toward, but it's going to take a while, and we
I'm,
see an analog in Apple's personal AI, right? Like
uh,
their on device AI. We see an analog to these kinds of systems, though they're not going to like click your mouse around and stuff. They do have an awareness of who you are, what you do, when your events are, right? So it's an emerging space to again let these algorithms interact with the world in a limited sense, the way that we interact with the world, especially through computers. So
yeah.
yeah,
So, I mean, the Apple Intelligence thing is quite interesting because it feels like, yeah, you can get on the new iPhone or whatever, but we haven't had this big stir, right? We haven't had
yeah,
this big like, oh my God, Apple Intelligence or something. But ChatGPT, it was like took the world by storm, and everybody's like, wow, incredible. Like,
yeah.
I got to play with this. I got to use this. And it feels like maybe when whoever releases this next releases it publicly, that people are going to start playing with it, and it's going to get pretty crazy. And so it to me, it feels like there's got to be this deep, push within each of these companies to release something like this first. But of course, you don't want it to be a catastrophic release. And so there's this, I think Dario was talking about this balance between sort of creative tension and then safety, throughout the podcast with Lex. And we're really in this quite interesting space. They're racing to release things that are going to get them the huge exposure, that are going to increase the capabilities for everybody. But at the same time, there's this weird sort of push for also, let's get some more regulation, and try to understand like how this is going to affect things. Like this is a world we should all expect, in short, in a not too distant future, from Anthropic or GPT models from OpenAI or from everybody eventually, right? And so, it's kind of crazy. Like, it's cool and it's crazy, and this does feel like kind of a big next step to me. Does it feel big to you?
No, it feels like it feels we've been trying to do this, and there are other systems that have done this, right? I mean, this is the first time we're seeing this from a big provider, absolutely. And so is that like a signal that big steps are coming? I think probably, but this is in reality it's just applying the same pattern we have, right?
That's right.
But like making the tool the mouse, or making the tool the keyboard, or making
That's
the
right.
tool bash commands. And so I think what will come of this, now that it's more easily enabled for developers, is likely to be big, and is likely to be something that's incredibly useful and powerful. But the thing itself is just kind of like setting up the pieces to be able to make the big thing, right? And that is something that we could look back on and say this was a moment, a pivotal moment. But by itself, it's not super.
Yeah.
It's not crazy. It's like of course the mouse is a tool. Of course
Yeah,
the keyboard's a tool. Of course, you know what I mean.
yeah.
It makes sense.
That's right. That's right. But it is crazy. And for sure, it is crazy, I would say, to most people,
Yeah.
myself included. And I think, I think that when we look back, I think it'll be an interesting thing, kind of like when we saw GPT-2, the developers were like, yeah, of course it works. Like, because they were paying attention to GPT and GPT-2 and GPT-3. But it wasn't until Chat GPT that was like years later that everybody else woke up to it because it was like ready for prime time. So I do think that we're early in the game here. When it's ready for prime time, watch out. And to me, this also is like a really interesting potential job killer sort of capability for AI that I'm going to be paying close attention to. And it's quite exciting, quite terrifying.
It
Crazy
is
world
both
we're
those
living in,
things.
dude.
Yeah, it is both those things. That's for dang sure.
Okay. On to the next. All right, thanks, Wiz. So here's what we know, guys, about how this thing works and how we can measure how well it works. Yes, we can use language like it allows the LLM to perceive and interact with computer interfaces. I do think that this is going to generate a lot of new startup ideas, which I think is a good thing. But fundamentally, as Wiz is alluding to, right, it's just taking the instructions from the prompt and it's generating these computer commands in the form of function calls. And so it's really kind of this stepwise thing that has added up, over the past couple of years, especially over the past year. One of the things that was created earlier this year was OS World, and OS World came out April 2024 to evaluate the ability of LLMs to use computers like humans. And the authors said, hey, this is the first of its kind. It's a real computer environment. It's for multimodal now, multimodal agents supporting task setup, execution-based evaluation, and interactive learning across OSs. Pretty sick. Key being kind of multimodal here, because we did see this really start to emerge in 2024. And they want this kind of OS world to serve as a really unified, integrated environment that we can do assessments. And, how does it work? Well, I'll give you a quick overview here. First, a couple of examples. One example that they show on the GitHub is like you might have a spreadsheet and then you might be able to provide it some receipts and then it might be able to add the new receipt stuff to the spreadsheet. That's pretty sick. There are also obviously a lot of pieces of software that kind of do this for you automatically, but that's not really the point here, right? This is already sort of a solved-ish problem for a lot of bookkeeping pieces of software, but this kind of capability is one that I'm sure those types of companies will be looking at. Or the classic, help me fix the code. So I'm building a snake game. Can you help me tweak the code so that the snake can actually eat the food? Yes. And again, like you can do this yourself by just interacting with Claude. But that's, again, not the point. It's about automating more of the end-to-end task completion in sort of a fully contained way. And so the way that they set this up is they set this up with this sort of configuration. So first there's a, instruction, right? Please update my bookkeeping sheet with the recent transactions from the provided folder, et cetera. Okay, so you got to do prompt engineering no matter what. There's a small configuration for initializing the tasks here. We got to provide some paths for where to find stuff, et cetera, et cetera. That's in red. When we get to this orange piece, you can see that this is kind of a post-processing that upon the completion of the agent interaction, we're able to do some calculations. And this yellow piece here is more about retrieving files, retrieving information. We see it's this getter here, as we see the post process here in orange and setup in red. And then finally, at the end, we have this evaluation, executing and evaluating the function. And this evaluation is sort of the core of what we're doing in the end with OS World, which is trying to evaluate how well our agents can interact with a world, a computer, a specific instruction aimed at solving a specific problem or task. And interestingly, here's the scores. Here's how it shakes out. Claude 3.5 Sonnet that just came out, 22 out of 100. Much better than GPT-4 Vision, 7.7 out of 100. But humans are in this like 70 plus range on OS World. Humans can complete most of the tasks. So you see this benchmark is set up to where we can assess, does it do as well as humans, and can we go past humans? Watch these numbers increase as time continues on here. This is something I'm sure we'll revisit in future events. Now, I want to just point out this GPT-4 Vision thing, and we see May 24th, 2024 is when they sort of assess this. This is after the OS World benchmark came out. And recall that GPT-4 Vision, first kind of came out in September 2023, and this was all about just allowing users to ask questions to pictures. So we can analyze the picture, get some natural language response. And they said, well, there's all these limitations, all these different things it's not very good at. And there's also all of this difficulty associated with just evaluating image question answering. They said, if it's harmful, if this should be private, if this seems like it's not secure. There was all sorts of issues that they sort of talked about specific use cases here where the early versions were a little bit less ideal than the later versions that maybe say a little bit more, sorry, I can't help with that. We took a look at this shortly after it came out, and the API opened up publicly right around the time OS World came out. And again, just as we heard from the CEO of Anthropic this week, that they were careful to warn people. We saw OpenAI at the time also warning people. And this is where we sit today, is like computer use that combines the language and the vision capabilities. There's a lot of very harmful use cases. So don't do that. They're working on some stuff to make it less harmful. They're working on stuff that can kind of detect, is this harmful? Is it not harmful? Of course, Anthropic is doing a lot of research, a lot of work in safety. This is a companion blog that came out the same day that goes more into the safety, and definitely something we encourage everybody to read here. The research process, the safety protocols, all of this, it's super important. Everybody's working on it. But all that caveat aside, let's go have some fun with this thing. Okay, let's test drive this baby. Noting that the current ability is quite imperfect. And on this note, we have to do this demo live, and we don't know if it's going to work. So it's going to be pretty hype to see what happens. So the Wiz really has a task ahead of him. And our build for the day is going to be, let's consider a problem we all have right now and we could all leverage. Let's figure out who we should buy gifts for Christmas, what we should buy them, where we should buy them. Maybe we can give a little prompt to an LLM, and maybe we can create a nice spreadsheet of gifts to buy for each member of the team, let's say. Wiz is such a nice guy sometimes. And again, we're not going to use Wiz's computer. We're going to use a computer. To do this, we're going to use Repet. Now, Repet is sort of a computer in the cloud. They are a, quote, platform for building and sharing applications. So it's kind of like an IDE in the browser, and allows us to deploy and work all from within the browser and within completely that contained environment. We're going to do that. We recommend you guys do that when you play with it too. Don't just give it access to your computer carte blanche. And let's see how it works, if it works, and let's have some fun with it. Computer use time, everybody. Wiz? show us what the LLMs can do.
All right, so we're going to go to Repet. I'm going to zoom in a lot so you can see this, the code, and we're going to kind of discuss what the actual code's doing. So this is built by Repet. Basically, they have taken the code that Anthropic provided everybody, and they've wrapped it in their environment so that you can use it easily. The only thing you'll have to do is provide your API key, which is trivial to do with Repet. Okay, so first things first, we're in the loop.py. This is kind of where the magic happens, right? Quote unquote magic happens. You're gonna notice with beta flag, computer use. Okay, that's great. It's got 3 different providers depending on where your provider is. Then we have the system prompt, right? You're utilizing a Linux computer using architecture with internet access. Firefox will be started for you. Using a bash tool, you can start GUI applications. GUI apps run with the bash tool will appear within the desktop environment, but they may take some time, etc. So there's no notebook link for today. The link is the Repet itself. And then we have basically this is all saying what it can do, right? And how to do it. Important, when using Firefox, if a star wizard appears, ignore it. These kinds of things, right? So the main idea here is that this is just a big blob of text that tells us how to use the features of the tool use, which includes computer use. Then we have this loop. Tool collection is going to look pretty familiar. It is just a tool belt, right? We have our computer tool, our bash tool, and our edit tool. The edit tool can do things like edit files. The computer tool can use the computer, and then the bash tool can run bash commands. Then we have a while true, right, where we just loop through over and over again using tools until we come to a message which does not include a tool use. And that's it. That's the whole logic. All of this code does that, right? So let's look at some of the actual tools themselves, since they're kind of interesting. So we'll look at the computer tool specifically. You'll notice we have these actions, right? Key, type, mouse move, left click, drag, right click, middle click, double click. Screenshot's a big one. We're going to use that a lot. And this is the idea of this is why we are able to do the things we're able to do. You'll notice that we also have these rescaling targets. Basically, because we have to take a screenshot and we don't know what our actual resolution is, we have to rescale it so that Claude can accept the images that we create. And then we have computer tool, which is a base Anthropic tool. It's called computer. It's got this API type, which is their beta. And then we have the ability to, do all kinds of things, including but not limited to call it with this specified, preset tools. So our computer tool, etc. And then look at this. We have match case all the way down, right? Telling us what to do. Doesn't get simpler than that, right? At the end of the day, it's just a big if else, but we're using switch case, which is nice. We can get our screenshots. We can use our shell. We can move our mouse. You'll see here that our cursor position is going to use this bash tool to actually move our mouse around, right? So because the computer obviously can't physically move our mouse, and we have to kind of interact with this all through these bash commands. And that's something that's very important, right? At the end of the day, we're still doing text to text, right? We're still doing this idea of giving a text command that is then updated with a screenshot. So the ability for Claude to understand both the images, understand where the cursor is, and then move it around, right, through that text domain, through the bash commands. And again, we can do all of our clicks and everything like that. So I can get out of this part, and we're going to look at the actual making it go part. So what we have here, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit just so we can kind of see this this happen, you're going to notice that we have our spreadsheet here, which contains person, gift, and link. And then we have 4 names. This is our team, Greg, Lus, Sriracha, and Wiz. And what we're going to do is we're going to interact with our agent, which is in this bottom pane here. And we're just going to feed it a command that basically says, hey, given the following about each person, and we're gonna zoom in here so you can see this. Given the following about each person in the spreadsheet you're currently on, take a screenshot. Please enter a small personalized gift idea for them in the gift column, right? So what we're gonna do is execute this, and I'm gonna leave this spreadsheet up so you can see what's happening. First of all, we're running the agent. The agent is going to not see anything. It's gonna need to take a screenshot. You can see it has a screenshot here. It has the columns that it needs, and it's now inputting gift ideas, right? So we have the first one for Greg is a high-end GPS running watch with trail mapping features. For Lusk, we have premium whiskey stones set with custom BBQ branding iron. I don't even know what that combination of words means, but probably Lusk does. Personalized cat portrait of Quincy with luxury cat bed. And then for myself, a custom painted metal D&D dice set with fantasy thing dice. So this is cool, right? But I don't even know what some of this stuff is, right? So we're going to enter a new command, and this command is going to be, given a person and their gift, please search Google in a new tab for their gift idea. When you find a link, verify it works by clicking through it. You should then populate the link call. Okay, that's cool. So we're going to go ahead and do the same thing that we did before, which is we're going to run this, and then we're going to watch and see what our agent does. And you'll notice that we're navigating around, right? So our agent is opening a new tab, and then presumably it will do something else. It looks like it's clicking in the search bar, and from the search bar, it's going to enter what it thinks is a good idea for Greg's gift, and so on, right? So, and again, this is all happening autonomously. I'm not clicking anything. I'm just sitting here, watch this thing go. And so what it did there is it clicked through just like we asked it to, right? It clicked through that window in order to make sure that that link worked so that it could use it in its when it produces the link. And then so it's going to add that link for Greg in this code here. We specified it press the return button, which it did. And this is what it does. I mean, it's pretty cool that it's just doing this by itself, right? Now, I want to touch on something we did talk about more, a little bit more, which is the idea of why this is a terrible idea to just let run on your local machine, right? So it's just doing stuff right now. And sometimes, there might be something that blocks its path or a pop-up or etc. And it because it only takes screenshots when it uses a screenshot tool, it doesn't necessarily, the page could have updated in that time, right? So while it's dope that it's just kind of doing things here, and that is dope, we want to make sure that it's not, allowed free range of our computer. So this is the idea. This is the demo. It's just kind of doing whatever it's doing right now. It's opening a new tab, looking for, I imagine, where to get custom cat portraits. Now that it's looking for custom pet portrait because it found Lusk, whatever it was supposed to find Lusk, something about whiskey and stones. And this is it doing the thing. So, we basically, the part where Greg describes this is very cool, very interesting. I very much agree. This is very cool. This is very interesting. Obviously, we need to, think about using these systems safely and everything like that. But that's it. That's the demo for today. Please check it out. Use the Repet. The Repet is available in the chat. All you have to do is provide your Anthropic API key, and then you too can watch your computer or watch a computer in the cloud, just click around by itself as if possessed by a smart ghost. Before we get back to Dr. Greg, though, I got to tell you to subscribe, ring the bell. We're live every Wednesday. We love talking about this stuff. We love showing off these interesting new tools. and getting them into your hands. So there you go. With that, we'll head back to Dr. Greg.
All right, Wiz. So you're saying that we are still using text to text. Is that right? We're still using text to text in a sense here?
Yeah, so under the hood, right? So because we can't really, like, we can't move the mouse. There's no robot, right? So we have to send a command through Bash that moves the mouse, that takes the screenshots. So at the end of the day, it's still communicating those changes through the medium of text to our computer. The understanding is what is enabled by that screenshot or that visual component. Like knowing where to move the mouse is derived from that screenshot. One thing you'll also notice, though it's a little bit hard to notice, is that it doesn't like verify necessarily that the mouse is where it's supposed to be in between attempts. So you can see already the kind of like the paths to improvement for a system like this. And I mean, it did the thing. Basically, it didn't actually provide the links for two of these GIFs, but it did try. It did find them, so we can now populate it easily, or we can ask it to insert the links to these components. But this is the idea. Yeah, it still has to send like a text command. In order to move the mouse around.
The screeny got the viz using the viz, but yeah. So as we saw today, it's the computer tool, it's the Bash tool that are really kind of driving this thing to help us look at the screen, to help us move the cursor, click buttons, type text. And again, all of this is the single agent with tools. We're just doing function calls. And do be responsible, everybody. But in case you are wondering how you can not be responsible, like Nalay here, I want to kick off Q&A with Nalay's question here. So can I just set it up without Replit and let it ride on my machine today?
100%. Can is a powerful word. You sure can. Yes, it's possible. Should maybe is a different word, and I would encourage you strongly to only run this in a virtual environment, in a virtual machine, whatever it happens to be that you're using, in order to not just let it have free range of your computer. Again, there are LLM-based guardrails, right? Like for ChatGPT, where it's very hard to get it to be rude.
That's right.
But that doesn't mean it can't be rude. Just as difficult to, and because it can execute arbitrary bash, sudo rm is maybe a little bit scary.
Super user remove. Yeah. Okay, so if I want to do exactly what you did to this question of trying to be a little bit more responsible, what should I do exactly? Because we just go to the Replit thing. We just follow the GitHub prompts on the Replit thing, and we open it up just like you had it opened up. And that's the best thing to do today.
Yeah, it's simply, I mean, best is an arbitrary word as well, but it's definitely a way to do it. If you have a virtual machine environment, you've got VMware, whatever your favorite tool is, you can spin up a virtual machine and you can run the code there. So there is ways to do this outside of Replit, but Replit's kind of already got everything set up for you. You just provide your API key, and then you go about your day watching it fill out spreadsheets by itself.
Yep. So yeah, I mean, what do we think are the use cases that we're going to see first here as being? I mean, what's the one that we're seeing? I mean, we're seeing report generation, filling in questionnaires. It's like that's what they highlighted. That's one of the latest that we hear from our partners as enterprises are quite interested in this. Now, whether or not it requires computer use to do this is a separate issue, I think. But that's one. Are there any other ones you're hearing about, Wiz, that are potentially or that you could imagine are coming down the pipe here sooner than later?
Yeah, I mean, things for which we don't have an API yet, or we're not going to design an API, I think is where I'm most interested in seeing this being applied, right? So form filling and stuff like that, if there's an API, we don't care, right? But if there is none, we do care. If there's not if you do have to manually click, right? If that's part of the process, then it will make it easier as well. Like kind of these exploration tasks that might not actually have specific APIs that you care to use, letting it kind of go out and search through Google and synthesize and write notes or whatever it's going to do. These things are useful and interesting. I mean, as well, right? When we look at something like a spreadsheet, now we have this artifact that we can share with each other on a team. Richard Gower mentions probably the most useful to enterprise solution, which is, we build something, now we want to test it.
User
Test it
testing.
is hard,
yeah,
right? And tedious. Who wants to click every link to make sure it works? Who wants to go through every single path and make sure it works? Now, tools like Selenium are probably better for this task right now, given the fact that this is not yet, in a great state. But those are only things that are driven through a browser, right? So when we have things that aren't driven through a browser, like literal physical computer applications, it's going to enable that user flow testing and that mapping of happy paths and unhappy paths. Don Branson mentions something that we probably won't highlight, but you can check out in the YouTube comments concerning some restrictions with tools like Selenium. So
yeah. Okay, so I really like this link checking because I mean, shoot, that's something we could use in our company. That's quite the tedious task. Yeah. So and in these tedious tasks, I also we were talking with we're talking with Lusk, who leads our sales team, and he mentioned some of his sales processes are quite tedious. Click, copy, paste, next person. Now, we don't want to encourage you to be too spammy here, right? With again, this has got to be done in a reliable way. Everybody hates getting spammed to death on LinkedIn or in their email. But you could imagine automating even further some of these outreach processes, building out sales funnels. That seems quite practical to me. And again, it requires responsibility, right? With great power comes great. And then I guess the last thing that you guys should consider doing, what do you think, Liz? If you can get it to do a hilarious error, see if you can spin up and go viral on Twitter. It's like, because I'm sure those are happening now. And I'm sure that those are, things that people will have a kick out of, a blast with. And so that's computer use 2024. Computer use 2025. It's going to be epic. I don't know what it's going to be. I didn't see this coming this year, though. It's cool that it did. We'll see how much this really starts to affect things. Does it move the needle? Do we have to wait years to get it publicly? We'll see. I guess it depends on regulation and all that kind of thing. All right, Wiz, thank you so much for walking us through it today. And remember, guys, use Replit. Don't use your own PC. Be responsible. That's a wrap for computer use today. And we will continue following these benchmarks. We'll continue following the models. We'll continue to keep you guys updated on how this is going. It's certainly something we'll stay tuned to. If you enjoyed this session and you want to start building, shipping, and sharing with a bunch of community legends, even building and shipping and sharing some computer use stuff, please do jump into our Discord and introduce yourself and tell us what you're building, shipping, and sharing today in the Build, Ship, Share channel. In fact, if you use Replit, it's supposed to be for building and sharing. So, let's do that. And if you're interested in kind of how this model is kind of working under the hood, we've got a new cohort of how these LLMs are actually engineered that we're going to be launching tomorrow. There are still some seats left in that cohort. So if you're interested, go ahead and send in your application. We're going to cover everything that was in the rest of the podcast between Dario and Lex, talking about pre-training, talking about supervised fine-tuning, talking about all the latest and greatest post-training techniques, from alignment using RLHF or RLAIF, aka constitutional AI, to direct preference optimization, to some of the latest post-training techniques out there like model merging and distillation. There's lots and lots that goes into these models today, and it's quickly something that's easy to get confused with. If you are interested in how these things are built from the ground up, consider joining us. And until next time, keep building, shipping, and sharing, and play with the computer use. And we'll do the same, everybody. We'll see you next Wednesday. And I think we'll be covering flash attention, digging down deep into the transformer. So if you want to get a little taste of how LLMs are engineered, next week will be a great one. We'll see you all then. Have a great Wednesday. And until next time, build, ship, share. Bye, guys.